Welcome to another edition of Eye on the Issues. Today we're talking once again nuclear energy, and I am talking to Dr. Allison Macfarlane. She is the director of the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia. Doc, how are you today?
All right. Good. Good to be with you. It's sunny, so I'm happy.
That's a beautiful thing. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit, if we can, before we dive into this, about your background. And of course, you're in Canada, and you were the former chair of the NRC. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yep. I was the chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission from July 2012 through end of December 2014. So 2.5 years. Just after the Fukushima accident, during the construction of the Vogtle nuclear power plant in Georgia. So interesting time.
And what was that like for you? What were your responsibilities?
Keeping, the nation's nuclear facilities and nuclear materials safe. And of course, doing a fair amount of international engagement as well, and going around the country, seeing all the nuclear facilities and nuclear materials operators. So, yeah.
And what are your thoughts on the nuclear industry right now with any of the latest developments? Do you feel a lot better about it now than you did 10 years ago, for example?
I don't know that we'll see what happens. It's there's a lot of excitement in the nuclear industry, uh, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And I say that because the excitement is largely around small modular and micro modular reactors, and none of these reactors exist yet. They haven't even been demonstrated. And so that means that there's an awful lot of uncertainty with understanding the costs associated with them, with understanding maybe some of the operations of them, the safety issues, the waste issues, the security issues, the safeguards issues. So there's still a lot of question marks.
Understood. Now, you recently wrote a study, like a couple of years ago, that came out called, you were part of this, Nuclear Waste from Small Modular Reactors.
Mhm.
Uh, could you tell us a little bit about what you learned?
Yeah, so, basically the biggest takeaway probably was that when you shrink a reactor size down, the core of the reactor, what happens is you have more neutron leakage. So the neutrons don't have to travel so far to escape the core. So you get more neutron leakage. And what that does is that reduces the efficiency of your reactor. So there are a number of steps you can take to try to capture those neutrons so you don't lose them. But all of those steps cost money. And so the value proposition that's being put forward for small modular reactors is that they're going to be cheaper than large ones. But I'm not sure that that's going to prove true. The reason that we have the all the what 92 operating reactors in the US, 93 are light water large light water reactors is because it's a sort of a fundamental tenet of economics, the economies of scale. It's cheaper to build one large reactor than 10 small ones. So we'll see what happens.
In respect to the amount of energy produced by the smaller ones, how much less than one of the big nuclear reactors are we anticipating?
How much less energy?
Energy.
It depends on the size. Okay, so the big ones are around 1,000 megawatts. Okay, and the small modular ones range from, well, some are like 450 megawatts all the way down to 5 or 1. So really, there's a real uh, range depending on which one you're talking about and at what moment in time you're talking about them, because a number of them we're seeing move to larger and larger versions, I think tracking economies of scale.
And given that one is not actually built and running right now, I guess it's tough to really anticipate exactly what we're going to see.
Yep, it is. It is. It's a big question mark. So predictions, when you hear people making predictions like, oh, there's going to be lots more nuclear power, I would take it with a grain of salt. We really don't know. If you need to buy electricity, and you're a PUC, you're a Public Utilities Commission, um, are you going to say, sure, we're going to get the more expensive one? We're going to go for the more expensive source. Probably not, right? So there's a reason that the only location in the United States that new reactors have been built is the South, is because that's the only electricity market that's still regulated. The rest of the country's in a deregulated market. Therefore, you can't pass the capital costs of the reactor off to the ratepayers. You have to find, in a deregulated market, you have to find some investors who will pay. And for a large reactor, that becomes really overwhelming. So,
I would think we're talking about a multi-year project, maybe a 10-year project, and then after
absolutely.
that, to get your money back, it's another 10 years maybe.
Oh, I don't know. It really depends. You're going to have to ask the good folks in Georgia, what the
Right.
situation is. But I don't think they're very happy. The original cost estimate for the two reactors in Georgia was $14 billion, and the final price tag is closer to $35 billion. So over a doubling.
Sure. In respect to spent nuclear fuel that's going to come out of a small modular reactor, how is that going to be handled? Is the plan from these plants, like for example, I guess there's one in Wyoming we're going to talk about in a second. Do you know if the plan is to keep that on property or send it somewhere, or that's up in the air?
It's up in the air. It'll depend largely on the operators of the plant. Um, but since everybody else's waste is at the reactors right now in the US, and the US plans for a deep geologic repository for the spent fuel have basically derailed, I'd say that, most likely it's going to stay at the reactor until there is a solution.
And how would that spent nuclear fuel from a small new modular reactor, for example, compare to the bigger traditional nuclear power plant that we're used to? Much less?
No, it's either more, a lot more, or a lot more complicated.
That's an
So,
interesting answer. Tell me, explain a lot more complicated.
yeah, the a lot more complicated is the one in Wyoming. And so some of these reactors, so if they're light water reactors, which is the kind of reactor that we have operating all around the US, if that's the waste product, the spent fuel that comes out of those reactors, that's okay. We know how to manage that. We just have to get societal agreement on a location for a deep geologic repository. The other reactors with exotic fuels, uh, they may require extra steps and hence extra costs. So the fuels that are being planned, at least initially, for the Wyoming reactor, then the Natrium reactor produced by TerraPower, again, doesn't exist yet, but those fuels it's a sodium bonded uranium fuel. And so that will require treatment, in other words, processing before chemical processing, likely before disposal, because you can't directly dispose of the sodium bonded fuel. It's not compatible with the geologic environment. And so that means it'll cost more.
Interesting. Okay, and now you wrote another article I'd like to bring up. We're called "Nuclear Energy Will Not Be the Solution to Climate Change." Can you, besides what we're reading right there, can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, for climate change, which is we're constantly manifesting and experiencing fires or floods or terrible hurricanes, poor North Carolina, what they just went through, um, for LA, et cetera. Um, so we really need a solution now, right? I mean, I'm strong advocate for keeping our operating nuclear power plants operating. because we need that carbon-free electricity, but we need a solution now. We need to be moving off of fossil fuels yesterday, and nuclear can't help us with that. Okay, you are exactly right. It took 10 years, 10, 11 years to build the two reactors in Georgia. Um, every country has seen schedule overruns with reactor builds, and these are now proven designs. Okay, so yeah, you can probably shave a couple years off of that 10, but you're not going to build them in 3 years. And it, say you wanted to put a new one somewhere right now, a new reactor that exists already, it would still take a long time to plan for it and go through everything and get it up and running. And so we don't have that kind of time, and we don't have that kind of money. Those things they're so expensive. And then the small modular reactors, I mean, because they don't exist yet, first you have to demonstrate them. So for any engineering project, you're building a fighter jet, you're building a bridge, you're building a building, you design it on your computer, you build a scale model or a demonstration model. When you do that, you find that there were errors or mistakes or misunderstandings in your computer model, and you fix them. And then when you scale up to commercial scale, when you're building a lot of them, again, there are adjustments that have to be made. These these steps take in the nuclear business a lot of time and a lot of money. And so we just don't, nuclear may be able to contribute significantly in 20 years or more, but 20 years is a long time in terms of climate change, and we need answers now.
Understood. And talking about Wyoming again, if we can, the state legislature recently just shot down two bills that were regarding spent nuclear fuel storage
Mhm.
location in the state, the concept of picking Wyoming as a place to keep it
Mhm.
nationally. What are your thoughts on the concept of a central repository, if you will, and what thoughts or what I guess information can you share with the people of Wyoming? If you were living there, what would you want to look at in order to make that a viable option?
So I think they're two separable things here. Okay. There's centralized interim storage where you would put spent fuel for a period of time, but it's not the permanent, you're not disposing of it there. And then there is a deep geologic repository, which is the permanent home for spent fuel, right? And the idea behind a deep geologic repository is it's a repository, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet below the surface. So really far down, not going to be affected by erosion and any things on the surface. And so it's basically putting it really far out of humans and the environment, far away from humans and the environment, so that it really would reduce the impact over time. Okay. So that's one solution. I don't think Wyoming had been looking at that. I think what you were talking about was the centralized interim storage, where for, whatever, 20 years, 40 years, the waste sits there in some kind of dry storage situation for passively for that period of time. You just have to make sure that you're monitoring so that nothing has gone wrong with any of the containers and that you've got security at the facility so that nobody's doing anything bad that they shouldn't. Um, and so, that's both can be reasonable facilities to want. The Waste Isolation Pilot Project in southeastern New Mexico is a deep geologic repository for the transuranic waste from the nuclear weapons complex. Southeastern New Mexico is quite happy with this facility. It's brought a lot of jobs. It's really improved schools. It's improved living for people down in Carlsbad, New Mexico. And it really enriched the area. So there can be real upsides, but then some communities don't want to have anything to do with it, right? And that's fine too. But you need to find a community that's willing, that wants to work with you on these for either kind of situation.
And last question. If you were the state of Wyoming, for example, or lived in the state of Wyoming, what is there any country around on the globe that you would say is doing the best at learning more and doing a good job of storing spent nuclear fuel? Is somebody doing a better job than the rest?
Yeah, there's actually lots of countries that are doing a better job than the United States. So Finland is furthest ahead. They are constructing their deep geologic repository. Sweden has selected a site they're about to begin um, construction. France has selected a site. Canada has just selected a site. Japan is working on this. The UK is working on this. Germany is actively working on this. The United States is the only country that's stuck.
And why do you think we are stuck?
Politics.
And what's it going to take to move that?
Uh, Congress is going to have to change the legislation. And I think it's time to admit that keeping the management of this process in the executive branch, it's been in the Department of Energy, has been a failure. I think 40 years is long enough to prove out that this is not working, and we need fresh thinking. And so I think, oh, by the way, Switzerland has also selected a site. So I think we should be doing what Canada, Finland, Sweden, Switzerland, Japan are doing, which is the industry itself is responsible for managing this material.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, is there anything that I'm not asking you that you would like to share?
No, I mean, I think, the industry going forward is we'll see what happens. I mean, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of hype, but we'll see what actually happens with the small modular reactors. It's really interesting to watch. I mean, there are some players out there who are doing the right thing and going very carefully and methodically, but then there are a lot that aren't. So we'll see.
So only time's going to tell, I gather, eh? Mhm. All right, Dr. Allison Macfarlane, appreciate your time. Folks out there, if you want to learn more about what's happening in the state of Wyoming, go to wyliberty.org. Sign up for our newsletter. Doc, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Happy to.
Take,
All right.